Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the shop. So, what are we going to cover today? So, everybody can recognize this, right? These are the original seats. I believe they've been recovered. I can't be certain, but there's no perforations. And usually, 50-year-old seats are going to have some sort of perforation. So, I believe they've been recovered. But what I wanted to do is a couple of things. So, first off, I wanted to get a headrest integrated into the seat. And trying to jury fit and figure out how to do that on the original seats was a bit of a pain. The second thing is my wife drives as well, and she drives my other vehicles. She's going to obviously be driving this car as well. So I wanted to make it easy for her to adjust the seat. So I thought, why not go to a wrecker, pick up some used power seats, and do, I guess, a reupholstery. First, what I thought I was going to do was simply take the hardware, right? So the lower part, which is mostly where you have the mechanism which moves back and forth and up and down, and literally try to figure out how to bolt that to the bottom of this chair. But then I realized that was going to be a lot of work, and then I was going to lose things. I was going to lose the power back, because these seats come with a power back seat. And I was going to lose a lot of the other stuff that would have normally been integrated into the seat. So what I thought to myself, well, what would happen then is if we get the seats, pull off the old upholstery, and then work on the foam under here to try to create a frame which the new upholstery would then bolt to. And that's where some of the challenges come in, because basically what you need to do is you have to shave off a lot of the bolstering. The bolstering will not work with the new seats. Now, they do sell kits for bolstered seats. But again, I didn't do any investigation. I just thought, hey, I'll just get some seats. So the second problem is I'd gone to the wrecker and they said, hey, you know what, we got a couple of old MKX, Cadillac MKX seats. Now these seats, when I got them, had not only 8-way, so these things move up and down, back and forth, tilt forward and back, plus have a lumbar engine in here, and also move the seat back and forth. Plus they also have memory, which means depending on who the driver is, the seat will automatically adjust for that driver. I can't do that. Here's the wiring harness for that. So basically I bypassed all of that, and what I did is I created a seat where, by taking the MKX seats, removing a lot of that, and I had to remove the built-in air conditioning and built-in heaters, because these seats were perforated. The leather was perforated, so when you turn the fan on to blow air conditioning or heat into this seat, it would come through the thousands of perforations in the leather. Well, this obviously has no perforation, so it would have been useless. So I removed all of that. So basically what I ended up with is you take the frame, you've got to shorten the frame, because obviously, as you can see, there's a bit of a height difference. You shorten the frame, but then once you shorten the frame, you still, therefore, you have your headrest, which of course is simply a reupholstered headrest, and I'll show you that in the process. Of course, with the new foam installation and filling out the foam, I was able to get all of the covers on properly. And of course, magically now what I have is I have a seat where I've got power back and forth. So now there's the power seats move back and forth. I can move the seat back and forth. So I can move it forward, I can move it backwards. Of course, I can raise it, I can lower it, I can tilt it back and forth. And the reason I did this is, like I said, my wife doesn't stand 6 feet tall like I do. And as we all know, these Mustangs, the seating was good, but the way the ergonomics were, where the steering wheel was, the size of the steering wheel, where the shifter is, where the pedals are, it's a lot harder if you can't make adjustments to the seat, not only forward and back, but tilting it forward a bit maybe so her legs can reach the the pedals easier, or tilting it back, or moving the seat forward. I know that'll push her forward, but without having to move the seat forward. So again, the adjustable backrest. So all of that took into consideration. So lesson learned, get some simple power seats, something where it just has maybe forward and back, and maybe the power back, and maybe tilt. But when you get a very complicated front seat, it makes it a lot harder. But that was the fun of this. Let me show you how I did it. So what are some of the things you're going to need? Well, obviously, one of the things that I needed is this 3/16 inch rod. Now, what this does is it allows me to build almost like a perimeter around the seat, weld it in place, and then I can attach the seat material to this rod. And it works in the back as well, so it allows me to wrap the back around and then hog ring it to this as well. So you have to create some sort of frame structure on these seats because they're simply not the same, right? So you have to, recreate that. Zip ties, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, hog rings, and you're going to need a lot of these because for every one you put on, you're going to cut off two. So you're going to go through a whole box of these things because I tell you, it's a learning experience. Obviously blades, and get a whole big box of blades because when you're cutting foam, the sharper the razor, the better. So you're going to be changing that quite a bit. What I also found was handy are these little clips, like these paper clips or alligator clips, I guess they're called, because they can hold things in place while you're trying to pull things in. Actually quite handy. And of course, then, some of the equipment that comes with the vehicle are the headrest clips, and of course the controller for the seat itself. As you saw in my other chair, I paint these the interior color so they blend right in on the chairs, and so they disappear pretty well. So like I said, so as far as what you're going to need, that pretty well is it. I mean, obviously pliers and screwdrivers and things like that, but from a have to go out and buy, this is kind of what you're going to have to get. So now that we're at the point where we are, as obviously as I said before, I mean, these are highly bolstered. These will simply not fit the new upholstery. We need to adjust the foam. We need to build the foam out as they've made larger. The back here, two things have to happen. First off, again, I got to cut the bolstering off. But the second thing I got to do is I've got to shorten the back. These seats are simply way too tall for the replacement fabric. For the original seats. So what I need to do is actually take this all apart, and then we're going to cut a section out of the back and then weld it back together to create a shorter back. So let me show you. So everything's stripped out of the chair. So again, the foam just comes out, the foam just comes off. I mean, it's very simple to take the chair apart. You can obviously, here's the lumbar, right? So the lumbar is driven by a motor. That motor then just simply either pulls together or expands, and that pulls this up either to support the back or not. Really wanted that. We're going to be doing a lot of miles and, want the car to be comfortable. Obviously, it also has a power back rest. So again, we'll be able to adjust the back, as you're driving. And again, just so that you can put a lot of hours in the car. As far as the base goes, really, there's nothing down here as far as the seat. The only thing, of course, it's hiding all the motors under here, which of course drive the tilt, raise, height, and back and forth. So very simple to do. But what I've done already is I've marked here a section that I'm going to be taking out. So very similar to the other seat that you saw, that's I've already completed. We have to take about 3 inches out of the metal here. So I'm going to cut this off. And then I did it right here because it does come right where this back is, right? So just above that, we're going to cut it. That'll bring this top down. That'll still give me my back support, but it'll bring this whole assembly down here. And then I don't have to touch up here because this is what holds the headrest. So again, just trying to shorten the back. So let's cut this off. Okay, no magic, like I said, cut in my case 3 inches out. Depending on what seat you have, you may have to cut more or less, whatever. But the idea is I cut that section out. This has now been fitted down, so here we are, we're back. We've kind of got our original shape back here, and we're really close over here as well. Again, you take that 3 inches out where it makes sense, right, obviously. In this case here, I left the whole lower mechanism intact. Simply removed a bit of the seat framing between the top and the bottom. And now I'm going to be able to weld this back on, and I will now have at least a frame to the height I need. The next step after that will be taking the foam, which has metal in it, and cutting it in order to reduce the size of the foam as well. All right, well, you've all seen welding. What I've done is I simply welded now the top bracket, which is a little worn, to the main frame. So now what we have is a solid seat. And as I mentioned earlier, now all we need to do is put the foam back on and cut out that 3 inches from the foam from the appropriate place as well. That'll shorten the foam so that it, again, locks in here at the top. So this is why I did this, because now I'll use the original top, so that'll all conform in here. It'll allow for the headrests to go in. It'll allow for the support in the bottom, but the difference is I'm just going to cut out that 3 inches of the foam down in the center part, and that way there, then the foam they'll fit this framing properly. So what do we know? Well, we know from here down to our cut is about 6 inches. So we know if we go inside here from the bottom and we come across 6 inches, we know we are pretty good there. What do we also know? Well, we also know that from the bottom lip up, we are 14.5 inches. So we can do the same thing over here, come up 14.5 inches. Make some rough lines. And that's how much we had to cut out of our upholstery. So I'm just going to take the saw now and cut these. And the reason I'm going to say the saw is because this has metal framing all the way around it, right? So that added some structure. So I'm going to have to cut that and then bring the metal back together and then weld it near the foam. So obviously I'm going to cut the foam away a little bit. But the idea is I still want this to be a solid structure, right? It still has to have a solid frame around it, just like the original seats had the solid frame. But in this case here, we're going to have the solid frame embedded inside of the foam. I'm going to re-weld it inside of the foam and then remove some of the bolstering. So as I was mentioning, right? So take the razor, cut it through the foam, and now bring this out. You can see it's now pivoting on, and we can remove this because we don't need that foam anymore, and I'll use that maybe, I don't know. But the idea is there's my steel, right? So I'm going to have to cut this steel, and I'm going to have to do the same thing all the way through this entire section, and there's steel inside the main frame here as well, and on the other side. So I'm just going to do that. That'll give me a gap of foam all the way through, and then I'm going to cut the steel. So first off, I went through 3 blades to cut this through. Now, why is that? Well, number one is foam really dulls blades quick. I don't know why, but foam seems to dull these things. Second thing is, of course, I struck metal once in a while, right? So anytime the blade passes through metal, it's done. But always keep it sharp, because a dull blade is what cuts you, right? The sharp blade doesn't. The sharp blade moves through, it cuts easily, you don't get frustrated. A dull blade, you start sawing at it, next thing you know, you snap the blade or you drive the blade into your hand, and I've done that, and most of you have already done that yourselves as well. So, as I mentioned, clean cut. I've exposed the metal framing all the way through it. I'm going to keep this here, obviously, for back support. That's why I cut it down in here. This will then just drop. So if I cut these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, actually 4, then this whole piece will then just drop, and it'll compensate for the cut that we made on the metal. Okay, so I cut out those metal sections, or removed all the metal around it. So of course now this comes down here. There's some fitment, but remember, it was a taper, right? So if you cut out a piece of the taper, you're going to get a bit of this. But remember, we're going to be shaping this foam, right? A lot of this bolstering's got to disappear anyways, because of the seats just don't conform to it. This is going to be pretty well foamed out and flattened out, and cut the bolsters down. So very simple to do, but sharp knife. The hard part, and I did this on the other seat, and I'm going to do it on this one, is I'm going to pull the foam back, exposing the metal, and I'm going to try to weld the metal back together. Obviously, short, cold shots. Don't try to sit there and weld it, or you're going to start the foam on fire. But basically, I'm going to weld this substructure back together, so now that it's going to be solid. So let's give that a shot. Now, a little trick I use, obviously, I want to weld here in the foam. So if I take this and push the foam down, and then just use a pair of vice grips to lock here, obviously that's going to keep the foam out of my way. It's going to give me access to the metal, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So when I take this piece, and again, push it down, and just hold this back with a set of vice grips, these two pieces, then I should be able to simply weld together. So, like I said, gets it out of the way, stops it from melting, or at least bursting into flames, and allows me to re-weld now the structure so that I have a solid steel structure again. So, like I said, the one pliers holds the foam down, also gives you a place to lock the ground strap on. The other pliers are holding the foam away from the top section, also gives me a way to, hold onto it with the one hand. So then I hit it with a weld, right? So now that's welded. You let that cool while the foam is away from it, and then once you're done, you release the clamps. The foam will close back up, and we'll attack the other side. Okay, so there we're done. So I've welded all of the framing back together. The foam now comes back. Now it's going to have some gaps, but that's why you go to an upholstery shop and you buy foam. You're going to buy high density foam. You're going to buy low density foam. You're going to buy thick foam. You're going to buy thin foam. We need to build this out now so that its structure matches the old seats. Now a lot of this bolstering has got to go because this has got to be cut flat because the seat was kind of flat except it kind of came in on the inside, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But we're going to have to start trimming this seat up. Now, even though you trim the seat up and we're going to apply foam to it and build it square so it looks like the original, you're going to do a lot of test fitting. Piece on, off. Now, the other thing you're going to need is fiber fill. Now, the reason you use fiber fill is because it gives you that little bit of layer of insulation between the fabric we're going to pull over and the foam. The reason is any inconsistencies in the foam will translate. You will see that through the coverings. So when you put the covering on and you have two pieces of foam that don't match, you'll actually see that. What the fiber fill does is you put it in just two thicknesses and wrap it after everything's done, and that's going to then hide a lot of that. It'll transition nicely, and you won't see that translated into the covering. So the next thing we're going to start to do is start to fit, cut, glue, and let's build the back up. So this is what I meant. So here's the seat. If I leave this bolstering in, you can see that this simply doesn't cover. Like there's no way. And then also with this bolstering in, there'd be no way to pull this in and get this to fit properly because it's just not enough fabric. So the only thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off some of that bolstering. So what was my thought process? So if we just take this and put it on top, you're going to see that the thickness of the chair is about 5.5 inches, right? So about 5.5. And if you come up here, it's fairly consistent. It's starting to narrow a bit as it gets to the top, but even at here, it's, there's 5.5. So it's maybe 5.25 from this distance up. And if we go right to the top here, it's across the top here, sorry, we are just at 5. So it does narrow, which is fine because we can narrow it. So my thought is, of course, if this is 5.5 inches thick in the fabric, then why don't we make the foam 5.5 inches thick here as well? So I simply sat that in, took my measuring tape, and tried to come 5.5. Now I'm at 6. Again, you can always cut more. It's hard to put back on. So as you can see, that's why it was a little tight still. So I just drew this line down here, which was at about, about 5 or 6. And I'll just continue to move this line back until we get 5.5 inches down here, and then maybe 5.25 inches up here. And then that will allow the fabric to sit here. And I'll just do that to the other side. So remember I said get some foam, right? Because now again, airbags, if you didn't have airbags, you wouldn't have to do all of this. But, so here's a sample of some of the foam I have. It's a medium density foam, but at least now I'm going to be able to start to patch this in. I've got then a thinner foam that allows me then to come up to the contours and, blend that in as well. I forgot to mention you will also need adhesive. Now, what I did is when I went to the upholstery shop and bought the foam, I bought foam adhesive. This stuff is designed to stick foam to foam. Does it really well. So the idea is that now I'll assemble all of this. This will become a solid piece. And again, when the seat goes around it, it's going to blend. The other thing I did do is, as I showed you before, is I now have trimmed this. So I'm trying to now get this to that 5.5. I'm a little thick here. Again, that's what the knives are for. I'm up to 6 on my blade count. So I told you this is going to chew up blades. I've tried to use serrated edges to try to cut this. The only thing that would probably work, but my wife would kill me, is if I went inside and got, you know, the turkey cutter or the roast beef cutter, you know, where you get the blades that do that. And that would probably work really well, but I'd probably have to sleep out here in the garage after I do that. So you can see, and I'm trying to get the camera, I think that looks pretty good. You can see how much I've removed, right? You can see the other bolster, how far the bolster came out and where I am now. So now we're looking pretty, I mean, you know, 5.5 inches down here, 5.25 here, and then diminishing to about 5 up here. So what we've done is reduce the width, you know, and remember, you don't have to just take it off the front. This also had huge amounts in the back here. So you can take it off the back as well to get the thickness you want. So the idea is I've been trimming both sides, a little irregularities, but again, that comes with the blade, so you have to use the fiber fill. But I think we've got it to the point where I'm going to do a test fit, so let's check it out. Okay, so of course, going to take a lot of work, but still, you know, we're in the point where, again, it's just got to move forward a little bit, but I can massage that forward, bring this up here. But literally, when we take this and pull it down and bring it around, you can start seeing the profile, right? The profile's coming back. You know, this needs to come up again, you know, as I mentioned, this whole area's got to move forward. So something's probably back here holding, yeah, I can feel it. You know, so there's too much foam back here. It's holding the fabric from moving forward. You need to bring this up. That'll run this seam across the front, run the seam just down the side here. We've got it pretty good down here at the bottom. But again, that's going to take that work to move it back up. And that's all this is. I mean, this is going to just be this for the next. I think the original seats, the driver's seat took probably about 6 or 7 hours of effort in order to get the back and the bottom and the electronics. Don't forget the electronics. I had to rewire everything because, again, there was just too much wiring. But basically, you know, this is going to be just a massage and fit and fill and fit and fill and trim until this back piece gets in, folds underneath. And as I said before I do any of that as well, as you can see, there's no structure back here for this to lock onto. And this is where I'm going to use those 3/16 rods and weld them to the steel and run, you know, one down either side, one across the top. And that way there I'm going to be able to pull this, wrap it around that steel, and then hog ring it, right? And again, same thing here. This will pull in, wrap around that steel and hog ring, right? And that'll hold the sides in. So that's how I'm going to do the back. You know, again, frame it out in steel. And the same thing on the bottom. So what we're going to do on the bottom is I'm going to bring a piece of steel down, run it across here, and run it up. So when the fabric comes, it'll wrap around that steel rod as well. And then either I can stitch it, or I can clip it, or I can glue it. You know, again, there's different options. But basically, this is how this is going to go. And as I said, I'm going to just do some snippets to show you some of the tricky parts. But again, I can't record 8 hours of video. You're not going to watch that. So I'm going to do the other side on my own and get this welded and in just to show you. And then I'll show you the assembly. So welcome back. It's been about an hour, I think, since the last section. And that really has just been spent cutting, trimming, measuring, like I showed you, right? You know, trying to get the thickness right here and the distance across properly. Cut the slots in it, because the way this is you can see all the stitching on the inside. That's got to go someplace. If it doesn't go someplace, it's going to bunch up and be a mess. But the idea is you have to take all of that and account for it so that there's places for it to go. And again, as I said before, the fiber fill. The fiber fill is what really does give you that, again, it fills the gap so it's not as bumpy, because like I said, when you're cutting foam, foam never cuts properly. So the idea here is that it's going to fill and you know, again, as I said, stop any gaps. Now, you want to test fit this on. So the way you do it is you turn it inside out, because if you try to simply pull it down, you're going to distort everything. So the way they do it is you take the material, you simply place it on the chair the way you want it to go. And again, all it is I'm going to be reaching inside here, making sure that that's kind of centered, right? And then you work it down. So you just start to roll it down, and you see what happens is it rolls out and cuts across the top. So, I mean, that's just an initial fit, right? This is not I'm not stretched it in any way. But what it's going to do is two things. It's going to allow me now to pull this, start to stretch it so that I can start, taking some of the wrinkles out. And again, it's going to come down. And then across here, again, I'm going to work these out. And like anything, you're going to be moving it and you're going to be adjusting it, pulling it in the back, pulling it down from the top here, which is going to, take some of this out. But the idea, that's basically it. The one thing I do want to show you, and let's spin this around while we're at it. This has now given me my dimensions here slightly. So this needs to tie to something. And remember, I was going to build a framing system. So that 3/16 inch rod, I'm going to weld it in the back so it gives me something to grab onto, flip, and then of course use the rings on it, the hog rings. So I'm going to need a bar up here to grab this piece on. I'm going to need a bar to grab this piece on, and of course a bar to grab this piece on, and that'll pull it around, that'll tighten it all up. So that's where I'm at so far. That's the back. This is day one. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I think I started about 10 o'clock. So with lunch, I guess about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. So a little faster than the other seat. I remember, I think it was about 8 hours. But that lesson learned, right? I haven't had to stop and figure out how to do something. I knew how to do it. Again, with the fiber fill and all that. And again, the channels I'm going to weld in the back. I already know what I'm going to do now. So next time you see this will all be off. I'll have welded in the 3/16 rod, and I'll show you that. Then we'll put it all back together, and then I'll just throw a couple of hog rings in, and we'll see what it looks like. All right, welcome back. What I've done is I've welded the 3/16 rod. Remember that 3/16 rod I showed you? And again, your application could be different, but what I needed to do is have something I could hog ring the material to as I stretch it. So I've welded a rod across the top, I've welded a rod down the sides, and I've welded a rod along the bottom. What's that going to allow me to do? That's going to allow me now to put the fabric on or the material on. I'm going to be able to take the top part, pull it down, wrap it around, hog ring it. The sides, pull them in, hog ring them as well, all the way along here. And then of course hog ring the bottom part as I pull it up and hog ring it on here, so that now we stretch the seat all the way around. Now, I'm not going to do that because I need now to do the exact same thing I did to the back to the seat. And of course, if I'm going to be doing welding and everything, I certainly don't want any material here at all or any foam here at all. And when I do make the final fitment where I actually start putting the hog rings in, I'll probably have to snip them and replace them, because as you're actually now stretching it, you're probably going to notice gaps, or there's going to be some indents that you need to fill. And I'm going to do that then. I'm not going to do it now because I want to do that on final fitment, not get it all done and then cut all the rings out, because I got to get it out because I got to still do the seat. So that's it. Next thing we're going to do is work on the seat.